Welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Stuart Mandel, joined by Bruce Feldman. Ralph has really become quite a slacker. He just keeps missing episodes. And I don't mean to throw him under the bus, but he was ready to go on this one, and then his technology just failed him. So hopefully we see him again soon, maybe later in this episode. We'll find out. We got some news and notes to get to today. Pete Golding, the Ole Miss coach, finally responded to Dabo's very detailed tampering accusations. Obviously, we get to the mailbag in this episode as well. First, Bruce, you put a lot of work, as you always do, into your mock draft, and that just went up on The Athletic this week. Obviously, there's a million mock drafts on The Athletic, but you do a lot of phone calls for this. I don't know how many people go to that length. So, yeah, before I cue you up on my one big question, just tell us your process.
Okay, so as you said, there are tons of mock drafts, and they come right till the draft begins. Obviously, this one's basically a month out. I'm not going to pretend that I am talking to GMs and burning up the phones on that part of it. In terms of like, hey, I think this is what they're going to do, everything. Where I feel like my mock draft differentiates itself from other ones, and I'm not saying it's better than all the other ones, I'm just saying it's different, is in the context of the players. I would suspect I'm the only one who's really talking to the college coaches who faced these guys. They scouted them, and then they actually played them, and they game planned for them. So they kind of know what they did when they went up against them. And it wasn't like, hey, I'm watching film and I'm just kind of seeing what I think I know or whatever. And I'm not saying that there's no value in that. I'm just saying in terms of here's the perspective of guys who actually faced them, what they thought. Now, Stu, I'll be candid on this part of it. Like when it came to cornerbacks, Mansour Delane from LSU is the guy I think is the top one. Obviously Jamad McCoy missed all of last year from Tennessee, but was really impressive in 2024. Colton Hood's another Tennessee cornerback. And so when you start to talk to coaches who've played those guys, they played all three of them. And so, one thing I remember getting a couple of weeks back was one of the coaches in the SEC was very effusive on the first two guys, and Colton Hood's a good player, but it's almost like it's hard to get them to really say why this guy's a first round pick if they're in the context of, I know what those other two guys, I thought of them, especially when one was a teammate. And so it's an interesting process because sometimes coaches will be a lot more brutally honest in maybe the shortcomings or what they think the shortcomings are of some of these players who you sit there and look and go, I think this guy's going to be a top 10 pick. And then when you bring that back to those coaches, they'll be like, it's probably not that good of a draft. And I think that's the case. I would say there's probably three or four guys where I'm like, oh, I think these guys are close to can't miss. I would say there's probably two that I feel that way about, one in particular, but that's a smaller list than it normally is.
All right, so we're a college football podcast. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty of why this team took that guy and whatnot. But one thing definitely stands out. Fernando Mendoza, obviously your number one guy. And then there's no other quarterbacks in the entire first round. No Ty Simpson, no whoever else you thought people might talk themselves into. And I think that's fascinating because I remember early last season, maybe around halfway through the season, there was a episode. I wasn't on it. I don't remember why. The two of you talked about how a lot of the QBs who went into last season with first round hype had basically imploded. Drew Aller at Penn State, obviously he got hurt, but his stock was kind of plummeting even before that. Cade Klubnik, who, I don't know, is he going to get drafted? Is he going to be maybe in the 6th round or something like that? Garrett Nussmeier. What happened?
I think it's an assortment of things too. Like one of the guys who at this time last year, I think people looked at as a potential top 5 pick in the draft. This would have been in this draft was Lenoris Sellers. I mean, he's really smart. He's really big. He's really athletic, has a good arm, was coming off a really impressive season. They weren't very good last year at South Carolina for all sorts of reasons. He's still at South Carolina. Now, it's not to say he can't be a top 10 pick in the 2027 draft, but that's one example. You talk about Cade Klubnik. I would go back to Eric McLean, the former Clemson standout offensive lineman, does a great show in season, focusing on his alma mater in great detail. And you're looking at it going, this guy is not playing like a 3-year starter. Now, again, it's quarterback. It's not just like, it's not only that guy's fault. I think there's a lot of things that go into it. Nussmeier, as it came out way after the season, and we had heard rumblings that he had not been close to 100% and was playing banged up, but then you heard more of that. And I just, feel like that also is factored into it. Ty Simpson, who I think most people will look at as the second best quarterback prospect in this draft class, has really 1 year as a starter. That's it. And he looked really good in the first, I would say 60% of the season, but then things started to slide a little bit with him and certainly with the Alabama offense. They did not have much of a run game, and talking to coaches who faced them, that will give him somewhat of a pass on that and saying, look, teams knew how to defend them because you didn't have to worry about the run. And there was some things that were a little troubling. Obviously, Indiana beat the heck out of them and him in the Rose Bowl. So that was a clunker to end the season. So I think those things factor into it. Drew Aller is a fascinating evaluation because, the first year he started, I think it was like 25 touchdowns, 3 picks. It was 2 years ago, the 2023 season. But then he would get in big games and you would just want to see more and see him take over, and he didn't. And then last year was a truncated season. And I'm sure there's some people in the NFL who are intrigued by his talent. I mean, he's got prototype size. He's got a good arm. Everyone talks about how smart he is, how well he processes. But he just didn't look all that comfortable out there, right? And so I don't know. Is he a guy who goes as a 3rd or 4th rounder and down the road people see something in? I don't know. The draft process is really tricky. I mean, at the top of it, Mendoza's going to go first to the Raiders. And I talked to coaches who have been in the NFL and also played him last year. And one of them was like, I know he got a lot better as the year went on. And this was a guy who played him in the earlier part of the season. And he said, but I don't think, usually when you're talking about a first pick of the draft guy as a quarterback, you want to see elite traits. I don't think he has elite physical traits. He's good in a lot of areas and he's really composed. And I love how he bounces back from mistakes. But this guy had said, I was with a first pick of the draft guy, and you could see it from the moment he shows up. I'm not sure I see that in Mendoza. Doesn't mean he can't be a really good quarterback for the Raiders, but that's what this quarterback class is right now, Stu.
I think it's just another example, and I've seen it many times over the years. I remember Spencer Rattler was the number 1 guy in some of the early mock drafts, and he ended up being in college for another 2 years. I think those early mock drafts that go up the day after the draft, going into the next year. Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to quarterbacks, are either totally misguided or just maybe more so than other positions. Our quarterback stock can change that much based on their last season of film. Because whether it was Matt way back when, Matt Barkley was he's going to be the number 1 pick, no question. He ended up being a 4th round pick, right? There's just so many of those guys, and it makes you think like, is everybody just throwing darts when they try to project these things mid-career?
I think it's a good point, Stu, because you go back to Matt Barkley, and if he had come out, I remember there was a big deal. This is going back to, they were preseason number 1. I remember being in the Heritage Hall, the USC's basically football complex at the time. And it was like a celebration. And they were talking about Matt Barkley, being the greatest Trojan of all, that he decided to come back. Everybody liked Matt. I don't know if there was anything, the physical traits. At one point he was the backup to Josh Allen. And obviously we know Josh Allen has like an all-time arm and is a better athlete and bigger and everything. With Barkley, he came from Mater Dei, which is obviously the preeminent powerhouse program in high school football, especially on the West Coast. And he did play well. I think that it's hard because a lot of times what you're talking about, where it's the mock draft from a year out, I think the people who are doing it usually don't have enough of the work to really have the evaluation of what this guy is. And quite honestly, a lot of it is media driven, being like, they're not people who've actually do that. When I say do that for a living, they're not, the Daniel Jeremiahs of the world who came from a professional scouting background. I think they're home cooking it as best they can. And as you said, there's still a body of work. And let's be clear on this. The NFL, with all the evaluation that they do and all the money they sink into it and all the investment, they get it wrong on quarterbacks, first round quarterbacks 50, 60% of the time. I know, I've had this conversation over, 5-star quarterbacks in high school, it's probably a 30% hit rate. And when I say a 30% hit rate, I mean 30% that they turn out to be like a first round quarterback. Not that they were a starter for a couple of years and that they were serviceable or pretty good. I'm talking about if you're going to be like the 5-star guy, you should be an All-American, like a guy who's up for the Heisman, not like, oh yeah, you had 2 good years as a starter and that. And I think it just goes back to show how hard the evaluation is. And also there's so many variables that go into it when you get to the NFL about how it, what's around you, what kind of coaching staff do you have, what kind of talent do you have? I mean, it's just such a inexact science. And I think that's what a lot of people are so fascinated by. You're muted.
Regardless of where they get drafted, there will be one guy in this class who is the Brock Purdy, is the guy who everybody overlooked, and he ends up being, solid starter, all-pro, whatever you want to say. So
give me that guy. Give me that guy. No, you teased it well. Come on.
I don't have the foggiest idea how to. I am not an NFL draft evaluator. Give me your guy.
To be a solid starter versus be all pro or whatever. Man,
I'll give you some candidates. There's the guys we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
Throw in Carson Beck.
Nope.
No.
No.
Sawyer Robertson. The guy from North Dakota State. I'm just looking.
He was a freakless guy. I would not go on that. Man, I could see Nussmeier being a solid starter in the NFL. I mean, I could see him being in the NFL for like 12 years. Luke Allmeyer was a really good quarterback at Illinois. I like that he was really good in the red zone, didn't make mistakes. I feel like he is a notch below Nussmeier in terms of just like kind of juice in his arm. So I would still probably go with Nussmeier on that. But I don't know, man. You look at the expectations around Drew Aller for so long, and he was a guy who didn't like some of these guys play quarterback from the time they were like 7 years old and 8 years old, and he wasn't one of those. He kind of came to it a little late. So it'll be really interesting to see what ends up coming of this. There'll be some guys you'll see, fans will know, go, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Now he's a 7th round pick, because somebody is going to throw a dart at the board, and more likely they will end up being a starter in the UFL or playing up in Canada, and then maybe they'll resurface in the NFL, and you'll see him in a game 4 years from now or something.
I'll give you my prediction for the guy who becomes a big CFL star. Taylon Green. He's a guy who is fast as heck. I don't know that he's necessarily the most accurate passer. I could just see him having a career outside the NFL. There's my throwing darts thing.
Okay. That's good. I like it. I mean, look, he's crazy athletic, and I would think somebody will say, hey, you could be a really big weapon for us as a receiver with that kind of range, that kind of speed and jumping ability. But you know what? I mean, he's played a lot of quarterback, both at Boise and then at Arkansas. So you never know.
All right, we'll take a quick break, and when we get back, we will have a tampering conversation. All right, back in mid-January during portal season, Dabo Swinney at Clemson came to a podium full of receipts to give us the blow-by-blow of how he accuses Ole Miss, and Pete Golding in particular, of tampering with Luke Farrelly, a linebacker who transferred from Cal, went to Clemson, enrolled in classes at Clemson, and then ended up at Ole Miss.
So at 1:30, Sorrells met with Luke face-to-face in his office. And Luke communicated to Jordan and to Ben Boulware that Pete texted him on Wednesday morning, the head coach at Ole Miss, when he was in his 8 a.m. class. And he said the text message said, "I know you're signed. What's the buyout?"
So we hadn't heard Pete Golding's version of it until this week, as Ole Miss is in spring practice. He said, obviously, I think there's two sides to every story. I'm not going to sit up here and use the podium as a grandstand and all that. That's why there's enforcement. That's why we have a compliance office, and they do all that. So the bottom line, the recruitment of Luke, he came on an official visit prior to the Fiesta Bowl, and I told him, hey, I want you to be our green dot mic. But right now, we've got a green dot mic, and that spot's not going to be available until we have one available. So I want you, he wants to be here. I said, but right now, there ain't a spot available. So if that spot becomes available, it's yours. It's a kid that wanted to be here, that we wanted to be here, that at the end of it came open, and he's here, and we're happy to have him. Your thoughts, Bruce? I feel like he didn't actually deny a single thing.
I don't think he did there. I think all he was trying to do was explain, oh yeah, it wasn't like we were late to the party here. This was just when we waited. It happened to be when the circumstances available. And then we shoehorned our way through the NCAA rules to make it happen. Right. And I would think if there's details that contradict where Dabo went with it, I would have thought he would have, took that opportunity to include them then. I mean, he just obviously explained the circumstances of why they were interested and what the timeline was. But I don't know. I mean, it goes back to this, Stu. Like, what do you think if it is exactly how Dabo Swinney portrayed it? And it's, again, this isn't really from what Pete Golding said this week, doesn't contradict it, that part of it. What do you think's an apt punishment here?
I think based on precedent, if it is exactly as Dabo described it, Golding will get a suspension. I don't know how long a suspension.
We're talking multiple games?
Yeah, probably multiple games. Tampering is not considered a major violation in the NCAA rulebook, but there have been coaches who got suspended for it. That being said, at the same time this is happening, I don't know if you saw this maybe a month ago or so at this point, certainly before March Madness, the Big Ten, which seems to come up with a new idea every couple weeks that the other conferences don't want, sent a letter to the NCAA requesting that they stop enforcing the tampering rules for the time being, because they think there needs to be a larger discussion about the fact that it may be outdated. That, in the world we're living in now, where everybody's free agent, everybody signs contracts, maybe we need to revisit those rules. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the other conferences want them to stop enforcing it. But it speaks to this thing that, like, the coaches, Bruce, like, they're always furious when somebody poaches their player, despite the fact that they do the same exact thing. And to them, it's like tampering is like the most major violation there is. But in other corners of the industry, it's more like, that's just kind of standard business at this point.
Is it curious to you that the Big Ten of all conferences was the one who would put that out there? I go back to this. We have two stories that I don't think they run parallel, but you certainly had the other one with Damon Williams Jr., the quarterback at Washington, right? He had signed a day or two after New Year's to go back to Washington. And then, without his agent, who happened to be Jed Fish's agent also, knowledge, he wants to put himself in the portal, and there was all sorts of things that didn't line up with that. But one of it was like the Big Ten was gonna lean into it and make sure that, again, I think some people initially thought, oh, this might be Oregon doing it, as opposed to, oh, this might be LSU. But again, the Big Ten, I felt like seemed like they were gonna, flex here and say, hey, that's not cool. Now all of a sudden, again, I don't know if this is completely different rationale, and maybe it is, but that the Big Ten would be like, all right, this is a game that we don't need to be worried about, or we shouldn't be dealing with right now, because there's just so many other things that factor into it. I don't, again, given this, I mean, the Ferrelli story involves two ACC schools and obviously an SEC school. It doesn't involve a Big Ten school. That would seem like a direct example of tampering, especially how Dabo, in there, I remember he brought up the GM for Ole Miss at the time, Austin Thomas, and basically had Austin Thomas throwing his boss under the bus, Pete Golding, in that anecdote about how it played out. It's just, it's usually not, as you know, Stu, it's usually not, doesn't seem as this cut and dry because people use third party to get around all this. And maybe that's what the Big Ten is getting at. And just like, guys, be smoother than this.
Well, and also 90%, 95% of the time, they're not dumb enough to put it in a text. So it's if Clemson did turn over all that stuff, I mean, the NCAA never gets that open and shut a case. Most of the time, coaches just complain about it and never report them. The Big Ten thing is curious because it would seem to be contradictory to not just how they handled Damon Williams, but going back to Xavier Lucas in both those stories, which involved tampering with a contract, a guy trying to get out of a contract that he signed, accusing a school of poaching them. Like the Big Ten put out public statements supporting the schools. And so now that it's like, are they now doing a 180? And I don't think it's that so much as, and also I mentioned it the other day, the Big Ten also is proposing that there should be an exception to the cap space where if you are using your money to retain a player as opposed to going after a player, it shouldn't count against your cap, which I don't even know how you would do that because all 85 players are a free agent. But anyway, what's the recurring theme when we talk about Tony Petitti? He's a pro sports guy who thinks college should be more like pro sports. And I think you can draw a direct line. Obviously that comes out most often with the playoff talk, but you can see, I think I can see where he and his presidents and ADs, whoever might be involved, saying, we now have full on NFL free agency. Let's model it more like NFL free agency. And doesn't the NFL have something that's literally called like legal tampering, like right before free agency starts?
Yeah. And there's a lot of, they also have harsher, stiffer punishments for all sorts of things. But again, there's a lot of stuff that's collective bargained into how they operate, which is much different than how the college football world works.
So I don't think they're suggesting that everybody should be able to tamper with anyone anytime. I think they're saying, let's be realistic here. If a whole bunch of players all at once come on the market and schools are offering them rev share contracts, like there has to be a way to communicate that before they officially go in the portal. So I don't know. I would actually be open to a conversation about a rule where tampering in season is still 100% like against the rules. But if the portal is opening on January, whatever, maybe for 4 days, 5 days before that, people start putting out their offers. I don't know, but I don't think that was well received. It was what was really brazen about, not brazen, but like unusual, is not just like, hey, I think we should have a discussion about this. We should have a discussion about this. And in the meantime, NCAA, we want you to just stop enforcing all tampering rules. I think that puzzled a lot of people. All right, Bruce, another story I wanted to touch on is actually an old story. This happened at a media day at Oklahoma back in early March, but we just haven't really gotten around to discussing it. You may remember a Texas receiver named Parker Livingstone. He was their number 3 receiver last year, Arch Manning's guy. He went in the portal and ended up at Texas's rival, Oklahoma, and caused a lot of stir at the time with a statement he put on Instagram that basically insinuated that he had gotten cut. I don't think he got cut based on conversations we had behind the scenes. But what did happen was Texas basically, they were going after Cam Coleman from Auburn. They were going to throw a lot of money at him. They made Parker Livingstone an offer, but it wasn't necessarily a substantial offer. So even though he didn't want to leave Texas, he put himself out there and he ends up at Oklahoma. And man, he is ticked about what happened there, to say the least, because he flat out said, I want to kick the crap out of Texas when they play this year. What I thought was interesting is you don't often hear guys be as candid about the process. He told reporters, if I didn't have an agent, I'd probably still be in Austin right now. That's the truth. His agent is the one who informed him that Texas was going after Cam Coleman, which meant obviously he was going to be, if he thought maybe he could become their number 1 receiver, well, that wasn't going to happen. And maybe he could go find a place that valued him more. And he found that in Oklahoma. It says he also visited Indiana. The comment he said at the time was that he said, some things are out of my control when he left Texas. So I don't know, Bruce. Is this kind of an interesting window into? I think a lot of times I see a reflexive reaction when somebody goes in the portal, like, "Oh, he's just chasing the bag, right? He's just chasing more money." Well, sometimes there's more to it. They might be chasing a more important role than they can get at their current team.
Yeah, and look, I think this goes back to like an NFL model where teams that are invested in players financially, especially if it's like the GM is on the hook for them in the NFL, they're going to probably get more opportunities than the guys they have less financial commitment to because they want those to work out, right? Now, Parker's a younger receiver. I mean, I think he's got 3 years of eligibility, including this coming year. So, if you look at it, and again, what's kind of interesting is every contract essentially is a 1-year deal, right? In college football, not in the NFL necessarily, but in the college football, it is where if you're him, and look, I'm sure Texas folks are hoping Cam Coleman plays like what people thought he was coming out of high school when he was a 5-star and right up there with Jeremiah Smith, is that he has a huge year. They lead him to a national title, and then he and Arch go on to the NFL. And then all of a sudden, next year, whether it's Dia Bell, who's the quarterback at Texas, you're going to look for new receivers. Now, I have no idea, given what Parker has said, earlier this month about the arch rival. If he has a really good year at Oklahoma, I'm guessing he's not coming back to his home state. A year from now. But I think the part we have to kind of refocus our minds on or retrain our minds on are these guys who may sign one place and in the back of their minds know that they're probably not graduating from there. It's a one-time thing. And then again, I'm not saying because he was so animated on his comments on Instagram or wherever he posted them that it means they're shutting the door on ever going back someplace else and you're going to be forever a Sooner. I just think it's kind of a window into what this version of college football is, where guys get somewhere, feelings can get hurt, people get emotional, and because now of social media, they have the opportunity to have like a live mic all the time, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or whatever. So they may be able to make these comments that, sometimes, I remember seeing certain things like Yaxel Lindeborg, who's like an All-American basketball player at Michigan. I felt like, he had some comments that probably, I forgot what rival school that he kind of irked, but I feel like that now happens a little more than it used to just because everybody has a live mic and there's just so many more people watching the process.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it used to be, you go through spring practice, maybe you find out you're not as high on the depth chart as you thought you would be and you transfer. But now the schools can just use money as the proxy for that. Like you can tell where you're valued or not valued by how much they offer you. And clearly whatever Texas offered him wasn't what he thought he was worth. And by the way, you see that exact thing in the NFL, right? Guys who think they're not being paid what they're worth will try to demand a trade or renegotiate a contract, wherever it may be. So I don't know. I don't know that Parker Livingstone is going to be an All-American one way or the other. He's not a big name, but it's just been an interesting window into how that all works. We're going to take another break, and when we get back, it is mailbag time.
Okay, and it's time for the mailbag. As always, send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Stu, the first question I'm going to tee up you on, it's from Brandon about the language of reporting when it comes to coach stories versus player stories. Hey guys, the Will Wade situation got me thinking about something Jay Billis touched on. The language used in reporting when coaches leave versus when players do. For our fans who may not know, Will Wade was the former LSU basketball coach who is, again, the LSU basketball coach. When a coach leaves for a better opportunity...
Well, you left out an important detail there. Two important details. A, he got fired from LSU because he got caught on a wiretap talking about arranging a deal for a recruit back in the old FBI days.
The damn fine offer.
The damn good offer, yeah.
Damn good offer.
And then he ends up going to NC State for one season, saying all the typical coach stuff about how much he loves it there, and going back to LSU.
Okay. So the Will Wade situation got me thinking about something Jay Billis touched on, the language used in reporting when coaches leave versus when players do. When a coach leaves for a better opportunity, it's rarely framed as, quote, tampering. We don't hear other coaches say coaches today lack loyalty or aren't willing to persevere through adversity. But when a player transfers or leaves, suddenly we're talking about tampering, immaturity, and kids who can't handle adversity. Never mind that these are mostly young adults making the same rational career decisions coaches make every day. As journalists, how intentional are you about the language you choose in your reporting? Stu, how about you?
Well, you're never going to hear me say talk about kids' immaturity or poor decision making or anything like that. I feel like that comes from coaches for the most part. Coaches who rant about kids have no loyalty, they're not willing to tough it out, da 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 da. And then, of course, if a coach is in a bad situation, he leaves. So I think, well, he makes reference in there too to like hearing TV broadcasters say that. TV broadcasters are always going to be extremely deferential to the coaches. I mean, they rarely criticize a coach. And I think you're going to hear that. I mean, there's certainly been plenty of criticism about what Will Wade did in the print media. I don't know about TV media. So, and the thing I always say, and this isn't just in this kind of situation, Bruce, but like when a guy turns pro and people think that was a bad idea, a bad decision on his part. I remember when Andrew Luck, way back when he didn't turn pro, everybody thought he was going to go pro after the first really good season at Stanford because he would have been the number one pick. He didn't. And people were criticizing him for being short-sighted or for making the wrong decision to not go and get the money. So you just don't know the circumstance. You don't know what's going on with a player's family, with his own life situation. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know these players, and it's like you're saying the guy's immature. How do you know that? I mean, we don't know that one way or the other. So that's my take on players. It is interesting that the word tampering is just so ubiquitous and accepted when it comes to like poaching a player, but coaches, it's just, you never hear that, right? Like it's just a given that schools are going to call coaches who are under contract, sometimes during the middle of the season, to hire them away. And I think that's mostly because that's what happens in most professions. Like people leave jobs, like it's just kind of taken for granted. But I do think you saw a much different tone around Lane Kiffin. Like that was, he crossed a line in leaving before the playoff that nobody really accepted.
I think, Stu, the other thing that goes with this is who kind of sets the narrative when it comes to, your reference earlier about how often a TV broadcast, it's the coach's side of things. The coaches are the ones who they have the history with. And so those are the ones who are just going to stay. But also, I think there's a piece of this that because of how the NCAA rules have worked for so long, it was like the players were the hired help and the coaches were the program. You'd even see, I remember this going back years and years ago, Rick Riley, the old back page SI columnist, I felt like he once did a story, and I don't want to say it targeted Brent Musburger specifically, but I remember him talking about like how it was like on March Madness time of year, and he referenced how somebody was going to go try to sink the game-winning free throw for Coach K or for Dean Smith, not for North Carolina. It was like kind of the cult of the coach when it came to college basketball. And I think that carries over to football too. But so much for so long was tied to the schools were so intertwined with who the coach was. And it's lesser so with this now. Like obviously Tom Izzo's been at Michigan State forever, but now guys move around so much, it's probably less so. But I think there's also that piece where people have a hard time looking at college athletes and going, oh my God, they're making money now. And that like freaks them out. And all of a sudden it brings in, like you would occasionally get these comments going, man, I wish somebody would pay me to go play basketball. I would have taken that. I'm like, yeah, but nobody would watch you play basketball or watch you play football. I could go to see that at your local Y, or whatever. But I think that kind of mindset seeps in, and it seeps in certainly on social media a lot. I mean, you can look in the comments on Twitter and you get a lot of angry people about it who are just wagging their fingers at the players.
Well, I do have sympathy for one thing that you hear a lot, which is, look, I was fortunate enough to come from a family that could afford to send me to college. There's a whole lot of people who aren't in that situation, who had to take out student loans, who are still paying off student loans. And so from their perspective, it's, why do these players not just appreciate what they have with the scholarship? I would have killed to have a 4-year scholarship. That's not enough. You want even more on top of that? I have sympathy for that, but I would also just say, like, if you were just like a regular college student, 100,000 people weren't coming to watch you take your physics exam. I mean, that's just the simple reality of that. There's a long culture of college sports that's very patronizing, because we just kind of, you think of the famous coaches in history, right? The Woody Hayeses, the Bear Bryants. It was like they were the authority figure and the players were the kids. And that has just changed over time, whether you agree with it or not. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get these mailbag questions about taxes. How do we know the players are saving enough money to pay their taxes on NIL? I'm like, that happens to grownups too. Lots of people screw up their taxes. Anyway, I think it's a good point. So let's go to Mark in Indianapolis, who says, "Hello, men. Started listening to your pod last fall and has become my hands down go-to pod for college football." Thank you, Mark. He's just trying to butter us up to get the Trader Joe's gift card. Let's be honest. In this era of transfer QBs, I contend that if I had an elite 4-star high school QB son, I would steer him to a good situation like a mid-major program that throws for 5,000 yards a year rather than a Power 4 program. Let him play there for 2 or even 3 years and then seek the Power 4 school. So my question, if you, Bruce Feldman, had a 4-star QB son like Ben, how would you play it?
I would see if he could play for Eric Morris wherever he was, or somebody like that. Like, look, Drew Mestemaker is an awesome story. He was more of a punter than a quarterback in high school, but they saw potential in him, and he obviously had a spectacular season last year at North Texas, proved himself, and now he's going to play in the Big 12 because they all moved up to Oklahoma State. I think the biggest thing, Stu, is getting to play. Right? Like this stat, and I go back to it because it's, it played out this way. A couple of years ago, it's the Dylan Raiola class, 20 guys at the Elite 11. And I don't know, there's like 17 or 18 of them have transferred already at least once. Some of them have transferred twice. The CJ Carr, at the end of the day, maybe the only quarterback from that class who doesn't transfer. He's at Notre Dame. He sat a year and now, had a big first year. But beyond that, it's guys bounce. Most of them don't get a chance to play. And then it's hard because if the school is waiting on you and you haven't played, and it's like, it's a gamble, because now all of a sudden it's like, what is he going to look like when he first gets to play, when it's live out there? As opposed to, this guy played well at a mid-major, or played well at a lower at a second tier program in a Power 4 conference and got those reps, and you get better with that. The stories of the Ty Simpsons who wait, and he was a big recruit for Alabama, are rare, right? And he started 1 year and then he bounced to the NFL. We'll see how it goes. But it's just like, you just don't see a lot of guys who are patiently waiting, and the program sits there and go, all right, we think we got something special. We're going to ride with him. More likely they're going to see somebody else, bring somebody else in, and all of a sudden it's a battle. And now the guy with game experience seems to have the upper hand. And so honestly, you can only play one unless there's injuries at quarterback. It's not like other positions. And that's what I would do if I was the quarterback dad in that case, just because I feel like at least they're getting game experience.
So you would send him to... He just said mid-major. I don't know if that means lower tier P4 or group of 5. Would you, if your son had offers from, let's say, Syracuse, Pitt, I'm not picking on these programs, like not the Blue Bloods, but it's not a guarantee he would get the starting job, or he could go to Tulane and be the starter from day one. Which one would you do?
I think I would look, Darian Mensah was a old Willie Fritz, quarterback. He was not playing. He was a California kid, and then Summerall inherited him, and he was like, okay, there was like, the other kid may have a bigger arm. The other kid may be a little more hyped. This kid's a good player. And it played well for him, right? He moved up the food chain. He had a good first season at Tulane, got a lot of money to go to Duke, played well, and got even more money, I think, or at least, got a bigger stage to go to Miami, right? And that is ideal if it can go that way. I just think it's a lot harder to navigate where it's like, oh, are you going to get the chance? Like, Julian Sand didn't start his career out at Ohio State, but it's like, will Tavian St. Clair, who's like a big talented kid who they took from, the state of Ohio, is he going to be the guy, when Sand leaves? Maybe, but I just think it's like, we see plenty of examples of guys who go to a big program. Bryce Underwood's a different example, right? Like of the guy who's like the high 5-star, there's a need there and everything else. But there aren't that many examples of guys who come in, will Keelan Russell at Alabama end up emerging as the guy? I mean, he was a big recruit out of the state of Texas, went to Alabama. Now he's competing with Austin Mack for the job. It's open. It's not like Kalen DeBoer went and signed a guy who had been an established starter. But you look around, like even Fernando Mendoza's younger brother, Alberto, I know Signetti really liked him. He from James Madison, then to Indiana. And then when his Heisman Trophy brother leaves, they go back in the portal and take a quarterback from TCU who has talent. But it's not like, even Sonny Dykes' comments about his turnovers, but it's, again, that's the direction they went. You can't question Signetti just because of his track record with quarterbacks is so amazing.
I think, again, just kind of like I said in the last question, money plays a part. Like some people, if the family is not well off and this school offers $700,000 and this one offers $250,000, you're going to maybe take the higher offer. But if we put that to the side, I think you just go where you feel confident that the coaches are going to develop you. Whether you win the starting job or not, do you believe these coaches are the ones to develop you into the best possible quarterback? And if so, go with that. And hopefully what he just like pays off, right? Like they get you onto the map, somebody bigger comes along and you get your opportunity. But I do think it's, I don't envy it, right? Because you could pick the coach and the coach leaves your first year there. You could think, oh, I'm definitely going to be the starter at this school. And then they bring in a guy from the portal you weren't expecting. It's definitely, it's more complicated than ever, I think, to figure that out. Barry in Portland has a really interesting one, different than we usually get. Frequently, I've heard you guys talk about your favorite venues to watch college football. Given your love of sports, pick 2 or 3 college venues you have been to or always wanted to visit, not including football or basketball. For the purposes of this, we are going to include basketball. You'll see why in a second. I will give you my examples. Utah Gymnastics Meet at the Huntsman Center. Fantastic experience in the building that was home to the 1977 Final Four between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Final game of the Women's College Softball World Series in Oklahoma City. Now you're talking my language, Barry. And Michigan hockey game at Yost, which, Bruce, I believe you have attended.
I have. Big Noon was there for a Friday night game. It's an awesome venue. It's really right across the parking lot from the Michigan football complex. And there's great history. Obviously, there's a ton of great players have come out of the Wolverines program. It definitely lived up to the billing. So I definitely second that one. Before you go, Stu, I want to throw out a couple that, for me were really eye-opening. Again, since we're referencing basketball and kind of cheating on the question.
Let me just say that I don't have enough from other sports. I don't want to force it and claim to know about other. I have heard that the Utah Gymnastics meets are awesome. So we are going to include college basketball in this.
Yeah. One place, again, like there's a lot of amazing baseball stadiums, especially in the SEC. Bluebell Park at A&M, not that old, but like I remember going to a game and I was like, this place is pretty awesome. And it's college baseball is a really fun environment. I would imagine like what you're going to say about college softball too. College baseball is like I got a chance when I went to Miami. Mark Stadium would be a good venue for it. Miami baseball at that time was rolling, and but again, seeing A&M, I'd love to see it. I've seen a game at Ole Miss. I would love to see a game at LSU.
I would think an LSU baseball game would be awesome.
Be rocking, yeah. Almost anywhere in the SEC, I feel like for baseball is pretty special. I got to see a basketball game at Assembly Hall, and I was really blown away by that. It felt like you're just looking up and like the court's in like a mine shaft and it's just straight up. It's a really intimidating, like to get there and see it. I was like, whoa, this place is a little different than I thought. And I've seen a bunch of, college basketball games at different places, but Assembly Hall really stood out to me. I've been to Cameron at Duke, but not for a game. I've been through there, to see guys I know who coach it on the football side. I would love to see a game there just because I've seen so many on TV from it. That would stand out. And I can't really think of too many other non-sports. Like I think it would be probably cool to see a wrestling match at Penn State or Iowa.
Good one.
I mean, Penn State is just like ridiculously successful right now with Cale Sanderson. But I would be fascinated to just kind of go in there for a meet and watch it. But those are the ones for me. What about for you?
Well, now that when you said that, it sparked a good one for me, which is I would love to go to a Nebraska volleyball match. I think it would be like going to a rock concert. Women's College World Series is definitely high on the bucket list, and actually, I hope to mark that one off very soon. It just looks like such a great spectacle. Everybody, because it's just like everybody in the softball world comes together. It's a big celebration of softball.
Is there I should know this, but you would, is there a home field stadium that is, kind of like the Cameron of college basketball or the Tiger Stadium of college football?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Oklahoma's, which didn't open not that long ago, but Oklahoma softball, I saw this when my daughter and I went to this event in Palm Springs in February. Oklahoma softball is the Beatles in softball. Like the other, the teams at that thing would sign autographs sometimes after the games. But there weren't that many people, it was a bunch of kids seeking autographs. So we were at an Oklahoma game, and, I'm like, yeah, you should try to get some Oklahoma players' autographs. They left probably to go do a meeting or whatever. And all of a sudden I see like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people lined up by the outfield wall. And it's like, oh, they're all there to try to get Oklahoma softball autographs. So yeah, Oklahoma is the pinnacle of softball. Anyway, I was very fortunate, for the first half or so of my career to cover some great college basketball. I have been to a Duke UNC game at Cameron. I saw a game at the Dean Dome, UConn, several of those. I've never been to Fog Allen at Kansas, which a lot of people say is the college basketball atmosphere. So I would put that number one. I covered an NCAA tournament site at Rupp Arena, but I haven't actually been to a Kentucky home game at Rupp Arena. That would be amazing. And the other one would be a UConn women's basketball game, which from what I understand, is every bit as raucous as a men's game. So yeah, that's my list.
There's one other one that would probably look like seeing and you and I have no excuse because we're on the West Coast, but seeing a track meet at Hayward Field. I mean, that's like the legendary venue. A lot of national championships have been there. That's one I would probably like to make a trip up for a weekend and see that, especially now that my son's into track and field. So it would be probably another one to add to the list.
All right, this one's not a question, but real quick, we did ask when we talked about the Kyle Whittingham Utah breakup for some Utah fans' opinions. So here's one from Jamie. Hey guys, Utah fan here as requested. One thing you didn't mention is that Whittingham's requested raise to $9 million came on December 3rd, one day after Kalani Sitake got a massive raise, reportedly worth $9 million a year. Coincidence? I think not. As for Witt versus Mark Harlan, I blame both sides. I think Utah should have fired Harlan in November 2024 when he went on the field versus BYU and had that embarrassing tirade post-game. Then he comes up with a vague, unenforceable agreement to pay Whittingham $13.5 million to, quote, facilitate a smooth and successful transition, whatever that means. Witt then takes half the coaching staff and some of the key players. Seems like he's getting away with highway robbery. I think Harlan knew those emails would get out to public, so he tried to come across as taking the high road and not taking him to court, when in reality, it's his fault for such a dumb contract. I think that is basically mirrors what you said at the time, Bruce, that nobody came out well.
All right. As always, send your questions to the audiblepod@gmail.com. Stu, who should get the $16 Trader Joe's gift card?
Definitely Barry in Portland for the question about the venues.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it gets us thinking. It's also like, it's probably a to-do list that we need to probably branch out a little bit and kind of experience some other stuff besides just basketball and football.
So Jill Thaw, if you're listening, our wonderful editor, Bruce and I would like you to find some space in the travel budget to send us to all of those places, even though we don't cover those sports and you don't need us to go. So Barry, please send your mailing address to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Everybody else, send your questions there. We'll see you next week. Hopefully Ralph will figure out his internet connection by then.